So this one here is split U, and what I wanted to do with the work was I create the image. It's a diptyque, so it's actually two pieces, and one side represents the addicted self and one side represents the true self. So it's working with that idea of addiction and running away from your true self. So in some ways it's a concrete poem. It's a visual pun because basically you have the two faces, and then the faces are literally split into two. So it essentially is a split U because it's like a human face representation which represents a person, and then the split U on each side is like visually puns is like a split U as a human face, and then as well as a Northwest Coast design element of a split U. And one side of it is the black side, which in my mind it represents the self that's like the true self, the self that doesn't succumb to addictions and can be like truly who you are. And then the other side, the red side, is the more addicted self. So in this painting I was reflecting on addiction as I grew up, when I was growing up around the alcoholism, poverty, domestic violence, psychological abuse. All of that's resulted from addiction. So in my childhood, I always had this dream of becoming an artist. So I went to this park called Cohen Park, and I draw things like Pac-Man, Popeye, and dinosaurs. And in my mind, it's like, wow, this is who I truly am. I can escape from like the problems of my family and become an artist. And that was my childhood dream when I was 6 years old. And in my own personal life, I've had to overcome addictions. Like there are various forms of addictions. There can be addictions to consumerism, addictions to gambling, addictions to prescription medications, as well as various other addictions that we have in our society today. Drug addiction, sexual addiction, all of these addictions where a person's trying to run away from themselves and find their happiness elsewhere. So I was working with that idea of looking at the split U and looking at the real, the true self and the addicted self. And when I went back to that park, I just reflected on how, as a kid, I had that dream of being an artist, and I realized that over the past decade, I've realized an art career as an artist. I overcame my family's addictions, which is a real problem in First Nations communities or like other communities that are disempowered and experiencing colonialism or neo-colonialism. And in my personal life, I've tried little by little to say, okay, I'm going to be who I truly am and run away from the addictions in my life. So when I went to that park, Cohen Park, and thought about that, it was an epiphany, and it was a healing experience. And then like working on this painting was a healing experience. It was cathartic. And when I wrote the artist statement, I cried while I was writing it because I just felt like this is like so personal but so powerful in its meaning. And some people would criticize that and say, well, it's outside of the discourse of contemporary Coast Salish art or iconographic content. But in my mind, it's like, well, it's still a part of the reality of Coast Salish people that we experience these problems with addiction and trying to reclaim our true selves. So those were the ideas that I was working with on this painting. This painting has the same title, Split U, but essentially it's working on a larger scale. So for small, this exhibition, what I was working with was the idea of working on small paintings, working on microcosms, working on a smaller scale, being more meticulous with the paintings, and having such a small image create so much profound meaning through the execution of the work, the artist statements. And with Split U, that one was a smaller one. With this one, it's a larger one, more on a human scale. So what I wanted with this painting was to create it in a dimension that would be the size of an adult, roughly 5 to 6 feet on average. So this painting was like really great to create in that sense, that when you're standing in front of it, that's really relevant to your interpretation and perception of it. Was that when you look at it, it's like, wow, this painting's like almost like around the same size as me, or bigger, or like basically roughly around the same size. And I was playing with the ideas of split and the word lit, because how this work is lit is really essential to how it's perceived and appreciated. It has to have a bit of a softer lighting and able to get the subtlety of the painting. And then the you would be literally like when you're standing in front of it, you're right there. And it's almost like there's this division of space between you and the painting. But at the same time, it's almost like it's like one at the same time, like you're there as a part of that reality looking at the painting. So it was working with those ideas, but overall, I was looking at influences from modernism and postmodernism and how that relates to contemporary Northwest Coast art discourse. And with this one, it's looking at those modern and postmodern influences in contemporary Northwest Coast art, as well as looking at influences from other art traditions on the Northwest Coast. So for this one right here, it would be the four-way split U-form. That would be a bit more of a closer geographic influence that comes from Nachalnith art, mainly. And then the other influence in this work was Robert Davidson's abstract impulse works, where he has this like real abstraction of the design. That's one of the things that I want to do in my art practice, is take the least amount of design elements and then render something that can have really profound significance or meaning to it. This work is iPod, and it was inspired by a design that Maynard Johnny Jr. did. He did it like I don't know if it was a dip tiche or a quad tiche, where he was like doing 3 pieces that were essentially a whale, but it also had the eyes were so prominently featured in the design in an abstract design. So I was really intrigued by that as an artist that likes to play with words and like use the minimum amount of design elements to render a human face or a whale. So with this one, essentially what we have is an iPod, like you're taking a pod of whales in this design, which essentially like comes out of 2 whales. And then you have the eyes, which are really central into the design. So it's basically just like a visual pun in that sense, that it's an eye and a pod of whales. But at the same time, it's an expression of how in this contemporary society, how we live so much in Facebook and online, and how we have devices nowadays where we can have a device that has movies, videos, pictures, music, and can get online content and games. And I love that part of the like reality today of technology. But at the same time, I have a bit of an anachronistic perspective of that as well, where I look at this technology of today, and I'm not trying to be a romantic noble savage. It's more that my spirit is more aligned with values that were in the past. So I was reflecting on that. It's like, well, I enjoy my iPod. I enjoy like watching videos, listening to music, and everything that I can do with it. But at the same time, I also like to get out in reality and experience the world. So that's what this painting is partially about. But as well, it's like, well, can an iPod ever really capture or render or replace reality? And the reality is that it can't do that. If we have virtual reality, whatever we do, it's always going to be reality that's the better experience. Whether we have 4K TVs or look at reality with our own eyes, your own eyes will be able to perceive reality better than a 4K TV can ever show it to you. So I was working with those ideas of not necessarily being against technology, but it's reflecting on that. So for that reason, when you look at this painting, you essentially see just the front of the whale's head as well as the fin. So that symbolizes that when you have an iPod, it can never really fully capture everything that you have in reality. whether it's sight or sound or other perceptions. So that's what I was working with on this painting. Currently, I am working on with a curator named France, and she approached me to work on an exhibition with her, and I decided yes, I'd be interested, and out of curiosity I wanted to know who was working on it, but she said it would be Marianne Nicholson and Sonny Yasu, who are artists that I've always really wanted to work with. So I feel like I can't turn the opportunity down because I really admire those artists and their art practice. And so that will be an exhibition where we are taking an artifact, reclaiming it, and then replicating it as a communal project involving the community of Cowichan. And then as well, I'll be finishing my master's degree, which is at the University of Victoria. And when I began it a decade ago, it was interdisciplinary master's degree, and it was a critique of the literature on Coast Salish art. And then as my career progressed, it basically took over to the point where I decided to make a full-time living as an artist. But it was always one of the biggest regrets that I never finished my master's. So Dr. Andrea Walsh at the University of Victoria, she approached me and said, how would you feel about working on this project with me? And I would, it's a print project, which is involving myself as an assistant researcher on the project with Dr. Andrea Walsh, and then Sean Peterson, who's Puyallup and Tulalip Coast Salish artist from Washington State. He's going to be involved in the curatorial process, and what we're doing with that is we're creating a symposium, getting Coast Salish artists together to talk about Coast Salish printing, and then after that we'll write what our findings from that research are, and then we'll have a catalog which I'll write for that catalog, and that'll result in an exhibition. So that's one of the other projects that I'm working on as well. But when I agreed to work with Andrea on that, I felt really honored. And then when we met for the first time to discuss the project, she asked me, how would you feel about working on your master's degree again? And I just felt like that's one of the biggest regrets I've had, is never finishing it. So she said she'd like for me to come back, and I thought, wow, my life is just getting so much better now that I'll have the master's degree. I have these two major projects that are coming up, as well as an exhibition in Australia, and then this exhibition that happened recently, as well as over at the Legacy Gallery, where I curated Perpetual Salish. So after Urban Thunderbirds, that was something that really caused a really positive change in the direction of my career. So that's basically what I've been working on lately, as well as the possibility of an exhibition in Australia with Rennie Cook and Dylan Thomas, and we'll see if Francis Dick also becomes involved in that. So those are the things that I'm going to be working on in the near future.
I couldn't leave that photo of you at the Screen show and all the oh, I do it. It won't. It's different, but tricks. Yeah, well, I wouldn't be, because I